How did you go with getting all of your checkpoints created? I hope that one of the methods worked for you and that you now have them all nicely positioned. Just make sure that you have a close inspection of them and that they're all in the right spot and where they can be collided with. So, for example, on some of these bridges and uphill parts, they might have been embedded into the surface and you may have to just manually move those up a bit. It'll be dependent in these positions of where your circuit waypoints are sitting, because these are going to be centered basically on the line that connects your waypoints. So that's sort of at the height that it's going to be. So just ensure that when a car goes through them, that it is going to cause the trigger to go off. Now, the cars need to know when they have hit a checkpoint. The checkpoints are all set up. Remember, we've tagged them as checkpoint and they're all numbered. So it's now up to the car's collider to know when it has triggered a checkpoint so that it can keep track of it. We are therefore going to create another script. So right click, create C# script, and I'm going to call this checkpoint manager. Now you might have noticed that my assets folder at the top is a little bit more organized. That's because I put all of my scripts in the script folder, funnily enough, just to get them out of the road because we're not really using them much anymore. Okay, so let's open up our checkpoint manager. Now this is going to keep a track of the laps and the checkpoint that we've gone through. The other really important thing is it keeps a track of the last checkpoint that we went through so that we can test that you aren't skipping any checkpoints, because that would be cheating. So the properties up the top, we're going to add public int lap equals 0 to start at, public int checkpoint equals -1. I'll get to why it's -1 in a second. Int checkpoint count, and then int next checkpoint. All right, so checkpoint count will let us know how many in total checkpoints there are. And then next checkpoint is going to be able to tell us what the next checkpoint we should expect will be. All right, so let's go into the start and we're going to count how many checkpoints we've got. So checkpoint count equals game object dot find objects with tag. Where's that? Down here. And we're looking for all the checkpoints that we created. So this is a really easy way of doing it. Granted, this code is about to go on every single rigid body of the vehicles. And that means that this checkpoint count is going to get calculated 4 times. So you could actually make it a global static and stick it somewhere so that doesn't happen that many times and reference it. But for me, it's only happening 4 times when the cars get created. So I've thought, well, I'm just going to be a little bit lazy and leave it hanging around in here. But if you were considering optimizing your code, you probably would make sure this only happened once and somewhere else. So that's your checkpoint count. Okay, now we don't need an update. Let's get rid of that. Instead, what we're going to have is a void on trigger enter, because we're monitoring when we run into a trigger. So collider col, which is the object we've just run into. First of all, we're going to check that we ran into a checkpoint. So col.gameObject.tag equals checkpoint. Very important that checkpoint in this case is spelt the same way in lowercase, exactly as you've got it as a tag. Otherwise, it's not going to match it. So now if we have run into a checkpoint, we need a double equals up here, don't we, for testing? We're going to say int this checkpoint number equals int.parse col.game object.name. And that is why we set the names of all our checkpoints to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We know which checkpoint we're going through because we're turning its name, which is a string, into an integer and then putting it into this variable here. Okay, so then we're going to say if this checkpoint number equals the next checkpoint, then checkpoint equals this checkpoint number. So it's basically saying in this case that as we go and get the next checkpoint, if it's the one we were expecting by this here, then we can update our current checkpoint we're going through to this checkpoint number, and then later on we will update where the next checkpoint is. And then if checkpoint equals 0, then our lap goes plus plus. So lap begins at 0. When you go through that very first checkpoint, which is in that starters area or the starting line, just after where the cars are sitting at the moment, it will make the lap automatically go up to the first lap. So you'll be on the first lap as soon as you pass under that starters post. Okay, so once we've done that, we're going to update what the next checkpoint we're looking for is going to be. Then we're going to say if next checkpoint is greater than or equals the checkpoint count, and this is why we took that count, because if we've reached the end of the checkpoints, then the next checkpoint needs to go back to 0. It's the same thing with the waypoints. When we're moving around waypoints and we've reached the end, we need to go back to 0. Okay, so the next checkpoint is always updated as being the next one along. When we get to it, we're checking if it's the one we expected that we were going to get to. If it is, then we can count the checkpoint as a valid checkpoint and update the next checkpoint. So it's only going to let us go one checkpoint at a time. We cannot skip a checkpoint. If you skip a checkpoint, this is not going to fire. This will never get updated, and you would actually have to loop back and go through the expected checkpoint again to keep your checkpoint count going up. All right, so let's save that. Okay, so let's go back into Unity with that script, and we're going to add it to the car body of all of the vehicles. So just drag and drop that onto each one, and that includes your AIs as well. Car body, just checking that it's there. Yep, and our last one like that. Okay, so at this point we could run it and it would start working and that would be fine, but we've got absolutely no idea because we can't see it unless we print anything out. So in the next lecture we'll come back and we'll use the area where we've got the player's name to display a lap and checkpoint counter.